Hello buzzers, John here. I've got a little project for you, one of our isolation projects or our ISO projects, and this one is fantastic because it's something you can do right now. You can do it today or over the weekend, and it all revolves around creating arty shots. What I've got here is a very simple shot. This is obviously a daisy plucked from the back garden. I've put a little bit of water drop on it using a paintbrush, and I've taken it against a blue background. I then tried it with a red background, then tried it with a green background. That's all well and good. You can do this kind of thing. I just used a macro lens for it. But I don't want to talk so much about the flower itself. It's how you can transform this into something a little bit more arty. And that all occurs by using textures. So if we take our original shot, there's our daisy on a blue background. What I've done is incorporated a texture with it. And then I can add another texture as well with it. And these textures that have been used, I've just shot these using the same lens, and I shot about 36 of these different textures just around the backyard in about 10-15 minutes. And that allows me to create a texture library that I can use with these kind of shots. So whichever color you go for, whatever subject you go for, you can incorporate the textures with the image to get a very different look and feel. If you look at that, it's a perfectly nice shot, quite plain, quite bland, but then you incorporate the texture and you get something much artier. And the benefit of using textures is you not only learn more about Photoshop layers and blending modes and all this kind of thing, you also build up a library of stuff you can access at any time to change the look and change the direction and the feel of any of your shots and give them an arty twist that can be quite attractive and quite appealing. So that's the kind of result we're going to build, but let's have a look at the textures themselves, because that's the important bit in this. It's not so much a subject, it's the components you're going to use to create the overall look and feel. So if I just pop into my bridge, and to do that I'm just going to go to File, Browse in Bridge, and here are my textures. Here's the ones I shot in about 15 minutes. There's 36 of them. They're all black and white. I converted them to black and white and saved them as JPEGs because black and white is going to work best with most images. You can of course use color textures if you want to, but they're going to colorize your subjects when you blend them with the subject. So black and white is better because you're not going to get any color artifacts coming through from the texture. And all I've done is gone for fairly low contrast shots, shoot predominantly in the shade if you can, so you don't get too much kind of a high contrast stuff going on. Here's a bit of stone, we've got a leaf, we've got another bit of stone, there's some more stone, lots of stone. Stones are great textures, and you'll find that there's some wood there, another bit of wood grain, all kinds of stuff, and you can find these really quickly and easily. You can use any lens to shoot these textures. I used a macro lens because it's really straightforward and easy to pick out small details within something with a macro lens. But if you've got something like a 70-300, use it on the 300 end, and you can very quickly get yourself a whole library of different textures that can be used with a variety of different images. So here's an example. That one's taken in the sun, but I've taken the contrast out. So go for fairly low contrast results if you do convert them in RAW, or if you shoot as JPEGs, just whack the contrast down a bit before you save it out. So there's a whole range of different textures I've got there. And what we'll do now, we'll open up an image and we're going to blend these textures with the image to create something a little bit different. So I'll pop back to Photoshop, and I'll just get rid of all these various changes I've made so we go back to our base image. So that's my subject, and we can look at flower photography perhaps a later date, but shoot yourself a flower, leave a bit of space around the edge of it so you've got room for the texture to work, and just get yourself a nice simple flower portrait, or indeed anything else you want to texturize. It doesn't have to be a flower, I'm just using that because it's nice and convenient. So once you've got your shot of your subject on screen in Photoshop, the next thing you want to do is make sure you've got your layers panel up on screen because you're going to need that. So if yours isn't already down the right hand side of your Photoshop interface, just pop up to Window and choose Layers from the list and they will pop up. And there we can see there's our picture out the camera, or rather out of the RAW converter, and that's just a single background layer. Just a simple one layer image. What we're going to do now is open up our texture. So to do that, you can go to Bridge, that's an easy way of working, or you can simply go to File, Open, and wherever you've put all of your textures, you can find them. Now in my case, they're on my rather cluttered desktop. There we go, there's my textures folder, and if I just change the view of that, There's my bunch of textures that I've shot. So I'll pick 35 for this one. So I'm going to pick number 35 of my textures. That's this one here. I'll double click on it, and that will then load into a separate window in Photoshop. And you can see here there's quite a nice stone texture. This is actually a bit of a patio slab. And I've kept the contrast quite low on it, shot it in the shade, so we get all those nice lines and details. Now I've got that on screen, what I need to do is get this texture image into my photograph. So to do that, we need to go to Select and choose All, or that's a shortcut Control or Command and A. That puts marching ants all the way around the outside of the image, so it means we've got the whole thing selected. The next job is to go to Edit and choose Copy, because we need to copy it into our system memory. Copy is the same as on a word processor or just about any other application you can think of. That's Control or Command and C. Control if you're on a PC, Command if you're on a Mac. So that's now copied into memory, and I don't actually need that texture on screen anymore, so I can just close it down. So we can either hit the X here to close it down, or we can go to File, Close, or we can hit Control or Command and W. They all do the same thing, and that will shut it down and take me back to my other open window, which is my daisy picture. So now we're back to the daisy, we need to paste in the texture that we've just copied into memory. So to do that, you go to Edit and choose Paste, or choose Control or Command and V. Same as on a word processor, and that will paste our texture as a new layer over the top of the image. So here we can see, here's our texture layer, that's layer 1, we can switch it on and off. And underneath it, we've got our picture. There it is there. So there's a background layer, and there's the texture layer. When you paste in a layer, it automatically becomes active. That's why you can see this is highlighted. But what we need to do is change the size. Now I've saved out all my textures to A4 in size just for convenience, but it's not quite big enough to cover this picture, because the resolution of the camera I use for this daisy shot is a bit bigger than A4. But that's no problem at all, because we just have to change the size of the texture to match the image. So to do that, make sure that texture layer is active, and then you hit Control or Command and T to go into free transform mode. That brings up this bounding box with a load of control handles around the outside. All we've got to do is make it bigger, so we just drag these corner handles out until it covers the image frame. Now it's big enough, we can simply double click inside that bounding box or hit return on the keyboard, and that will set down those changes. So that's all good, and now our texture is completely obscuring the image underneath. But to blend it with the image underneath, all we've got to do back in the layers panel is click on this box here. The box that says normal, that's our list of blend modes. So we click on that and we get a drop down list of all the different blend modes. And if we just mouse over them, you get a preview of what each effect will look like. So you haven't really got to know what you're doing or what particular blend mode you need. You can just have a look, roll over them, have a look and see which one you like the look of. And I think you maybe noticed there in this overlay group here, that's where we get some interesting effects. Overlay looks good, so does soft light. Hard light's a bit more aggressive, vivid light's okay, linear lights. There's lots to choose from there. So I'm just going to go for the lead of that group, which is overlay, and I'm going to click on that, and that will use that overlay blending mode to blend the texture with the base image. So that's all good. If we want the texture to be a bit more subtle, we can turn down the opacity of this top texture layer. That's just using the opacity slider here. Click on that, you can take it down. If you get to 0, you remove it completely. You go to 50%, it's half up, half opaque. And if you go to 100%, you get it at full volume. So that's one way we can adjust the quality of our blend. But another way we can adjust the quality of the blend is by selectively removing it. And for that we use a layer mask. A layer mask is better than the eraser because it's much more controllable. You could of course just rub out the texture in the areas where you want the flower to show through. But I'm going to use a layer mask because it's a smarter way of working. So to add a layer mask, again we make sure that our texture layer is active after we've blended it, and then we simply click on this icon here, the Add Layer Mask icon, and that brings up a white rectangle alongside the texture. At the moment it's white, so it means the texture is showing completely. If we paint black into this mask, we will paint a hole in the layer effectively. So to paint black, we need a paintbrush, so we'll grab one of those, and we need to make sure it's black. If you don't have black as your foreground color, hit D on the keyboard to reset your colors and then hit X, and that will bring black to the foreground. We now need to use a brush, so I've got a 600 pixel brush at the moment. You can change brush type and size and style within the brush preset picker. That's just on this icon here. Just click on the drop down arrow and you'll get all these different options. I'm just going to go for a simple soft round brush in this example. So with our brush selected, we can then pick the opacity of the brush that we want to use, and I'm going to go for about half height, about 50% opacity in the tool options bar up here. So now it means my brush will actually paint grey rather than black, so it will be a bit more subtle than a full black. So I can now start painting over the image, and that will reveal the base image through the texture. So I'm effectively rubbing out the texture, but because I'm at 50% opacity, I'm not rubbing it out fully, I'm just removing part of it. And you'll notice in the layer mask, you see the black appearing, and that means there's a hole in the layer. Now if you go too far or go over the wrong area, let's say I paint out the texture completely and I don't want to, that's okay, because with a layer mask, you can restore any errors you've made. And to do that, you simply use white instead. So if we swap to a white brush by just hitting this double-headed arrow here, or you can hit X on the keyboard, we can then paint back any areas that we didn't want to paint out, and we can restore the detail and even go all the way back to our fully opaque texture layer. And you can see again in the layer mask that white brush is having an impact and it's painting back all the areas that we painted out. So you can keep on changing your mind and fine-tune your results as you see fit. So let's go back to black and I'll just quickly remask that part. Let's have the stamen coming through and we'll just tone down some of those petals around here. That's the kind of thing. Yep, that's looking pretty good. Yep, I like the effect of that, so I'll leave it there. Okay, now that's done, you may want to stop there because we've blended the texture with the base image. But you can also add additional textures if you want to. So let's bring up another texture and put that into the document in the same way. So we go to File and we choose Open, and we'll find another texture now. 27. There's a wood grain one here that looks quite nice. So I'm going to double click on my texture 27. And there it is in a separate window. So we've got some nice wood grain here that we can incorporate into the image as well. And all I'm going to do is those same things. I'll use shortcuts this time. So it's Control or Command and A. That's Select All. Control or Command and C. That's Copy. And then Control or Command and W, which is Close. Now we've come back to our image, our layered image. And all we're going to do to paste it in, it's Control or Command and V. And that puts our second texture on another new layer at the top of the layers stack. We need to make it bigger, so that's Control or Command and T to go into Free Transform, and then we'll just pull out the bounding box just to make sure our texture covers the base image. There we go. Then we double click inside that bounding box to set down the changes. Okay, time to go into the blending modes again. So we'll click where it says normal and we can work down. We could go for overlay again, that works quite nicely. So, but again, you can choose any of these depending on the kind of artistic effect you're after. Some are good, some are bad, some are just weird. But you can fill your boots, explore those different options by rolling the mouse over them and just pick the one you want. I'll go for overlay again though, just to keep things nice and simple. And now we've got two textures blended with our image. You can switch them on and off to see the impact they're having. And I quite like the look of that wood grain coming through and kind of helping out the image. One thing I want to do though is just fine-tune the position of the texture a bit. So I'm going to pop back into Transform while that texture layer is active. So that's Control or Command and T. That brings up my transform bounding box and I can just kind of move things around. I can make it bigger or smaller and however I want to put it in. So I'm going to make it a bit bigger. So I've got these two wood grain areas just kind of framing the daisy head quite nicely. So let's just zoom back a little bit, make that a bit bigger. We can jiggle it around. I think that kind of thing looks quite good. Let's just take that down. Yeah, that looks nicely composed now. So once I've adjusted my transform for that second texture layer, I'll double click inside the bounding box and set down those changes. Okay, now once more I can use my mask. I'm losing some of the structure of the daisy itself, so I can add a mask to this second layer in exactly the same way as I did the first layer, and just hold back the texture effect in particular areas so I don't kind of lose the detail in the daisy. So to do that, we add a layer mask, so make sure that layer is active, then click on the Add Layer Mask icon. We get our white rectangle, there's our layer mask once more, and I just need to paint into there with a black brush to make the changes I want to make. So we've got black as our foreground color, we've got a brush selected, so all I've got to do is paint really. My opacity is about half height, so I paint in there. I can lose the texture from the stamen, and then I'll take the opacity down a little bit lower. I'll go down to about sort of 25% and just paint out some of that texture around here to allow the details in the petals to show through, but without kind of overriding that textured look to the rest of the image. Now I'll just switch my layers on and off just to see the impact they're having. Yep, I want a little bit more texture in here now, so I've made a decision to bring it a little bit back so I can just make sure that layer mask is active and paint a little bit of white into it to restore. And we just get a little bit of that detail coming back in there. We've got our stamen clear of any texture, so that's showing the detail in our base image, but we're allowing the texture to kind of ride through the other areas. And that's all there is to it. And suddenly you've got a very different looking image. There's my original, still sitting underneath, untouched. But by adding these textures, we get a very different look and feel and something a little bit artier. So a great project for you this week would be to just go and shoot a load of textures. Doesn't matter what they are, they're not pictures in themselves really, they're components to be blended with other images. But if you find some wood grain, some patio slabs, some brick, some stone, leaves, anything really can be used, and build yourself a little collection of textures that can be blended into other images. And once you've completed a project like this, do save it as a PSD file. Keep all your layers intact. So that means when you go to File and choose Save As, just make sure you use that Photoshop format, because that will keep all of your layers together. So the reason to do that is because you might want to use the texture layers you have with a different base image. So let's say I've taken a daisy on a different color background and I want to try that with the same textures. That's quite easy to do if I've got all those layers in place. All I've got to do is go to File, Open, find my new daisies. Yeah, there's a few there. So there's a red daisy, which is roughly the same composition as my blue background daisy. I'll just double click that to open it. That will come up into a new window. So I go through that same process of shortcuts, Control or Command and A, Control or Command and C, Control or Command and W. And then all I have to do is stick my new daisy on top of the old one. So if I click on that old one, the background layer, and then hit Control or Command and V, it will paste the new daisy over the top, and I save lots of time by trying my red background daisy in the place of the blue one. I've still got the blue one there, that's still sitting there, but because we've got all those layers already in place, it makes life nice and easy to kind of swap things out, change your mind, keep lots of flexibility in the arty images you're creating. So I don't know which one you prefer. I think I prefer the blue there. And the main reason for that is the color contrast between the yellow stamen and the blue background. They're opposite, so it has a bit more impact. But of course, the subject doesn't matter too much. You can experiment with different colors and different subjects for this kind of thing. The important thing is getting that texture library together and knowing how to assemble your layers palette so you can readily access all those textures and create different looking effects. Well, I hope that all made sense. Get yourself a texture library together, go out in the back garden, shoot a load of pictures with a macro lens or the long end of a 70-300, something like that. Put them into a folder and then you'll have your own texture library ready to use on any picture you choose. Alright, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.